What is up, guys? It's Vanessa coming at you with another video. Now this one is going to be the can you grow your hips video. Is that physically possible? If you guys like videos like this, don't forget to give the video a huge thumbs up. It does help me out tons. Don't forget to subscribe on your way out, and let's get on with the video. So after my grow your hips video where I talked about how I was able to grow my hips, my thigh area, my butt while I was bulking, there were a few comments from people saying, oh, you can't physically grow your hips, your hips are bones, blah blah blah, etc, etc. And so in the video I never said that I grew my hip bones. I did grow the muscles around my hips, which gave me the illusion of a, not necessarily an hourglass figure, but it did make it seem as though I had bigger hips than I actually do. In this video, I want to talk about, can you actually grow your hips? So can you actually grow your hips? Yes, and technically no. And I'm gonna get into that by talking specifically about the bone structure of your hips and body types. So different women are going to be shaped differently. They're going to have different bone structures. They're going to have different body types. Everyone holds their fat in a different way. I'm going to be talking about how that affects hip growth or hip size. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that your hip width is actually completely genetic. So if you have more narrow hips versus wider hips, that's completely genetic. You got that from your genetic makeup, from your DNA, from either your mom or your dad. So whoever has wider hips or narrower hips, that's kind of where you got it from. So not everyone in your family is gonna look the same or have the same hip structure. Some people will have wider hips versus others, or some people will actually all have wider hips or all have narrow hips. That all depends on your genetic structure. You can't really change your genetics, I mean, unless you're some superhuman, unless you're like an X-Men, you got bitten by a spider. I really don't know anyone who can actually change your genetic makeup. If you do, well then I don't know. That's some X-Men type shit. When it comes to growing your hips, you are limited by your bone structure. So what I mean by that is based on your body type. If you naturally or genetically have narrower hips, it's gonna be a lot more difficult for you to grow your hip area versus someone who is more of an hourglass or a pear-shaped figure who has curvier, wider hips naturally. With that being said, is it impossible to grow your hips if you genetically have narrower bone structure? No, not necessarily. You can grow the outer part of your hips or hip muscles, but you will not necessarily be able to match someone who has an hourglass or a pear-shaped hip figure, if that makes sense. A few body types that genetically and just naturally have narrow hips are body types like an inverted triangle shape, rectangle, or a straight, or some people even call it a banana shape, and also an apple shape. So those are people who just genetically have narrower hips. How do you know that you have narrow hips or that you are some of these body types? I know especially for me, it is very difficult to kind of see or understand how you have these different body types, because depending on how your weight gain or, you know, if you exercise, etc., it could essentially change the shape of your body, which can confuse some people. So people that have narrow hips, usually their hip bone is high, almost at their waist area, and these people usually have little waist definition, or if you do have some, it's not as noticeable as someone who has like an hourglass or a pear-shaped figure where their waist is substantially smaller than all the other parts of their body. If you have narrow hips, your hips and your thigh measurements will be around the same measurement or about the same. Now, how exactly do you know if you have curved hips and if you have these other body type? One thing you will have is a more noticeable waistline. Your waist will be a lot smaller than your bust or your hips. If you are hourglass, your waist will be a lot smaller than your bust and your hips. If you are a pear shape, your waist will be a lot smaller than your hip area, and your bust will just be smaller. So your bust and your hips might be smaller than your hip area, and because of that you will have a more curvier appearance. The widest point is most likely in your thigh area, and then you will have kind of like a natural dip in your hips, which will create like that curvy figure. Usually people who are an hourglass or a pear shape will genetically have their weight kind of spread out in all areas, specifically in their stomach and their hips and in their butt area, and that's usually where if they do gain weight, that's where it will be concentrated. Now, can people with narrow hips or these narrow bone structured pelvic area body types, can they actually widen their hips? Is that even possible? And can they ever have an hourglass figure? Well, not necessarily. People who have narrow body shapes will never have a full or natural hourglass figure, but they will be able to at least have the illusion or the appearance of a more hourglass kind of figure, but definitely a little different. So people with naturally narrow hips can actually work the muscles in their hip areas that surround their hip areas to give them more of an accentuated look and a curvier look into their hips. You can't change your bone structure, but if you want to change the muscles or grow the muscles in that area, it is possible to an extent. So you can focus on exercises that actually focus on the muscles in the hip area, and those are targeting the smaller gluteus medius and minimus muscles. Those are also known as your abductor muscles. There are exercises all over the internet about that. You can go check those out. And the key about doing that is that you are growing the muscles in those areas and not necessarily your bones. So you can't naturally grow your bones if you've already hit puberty. Obviously, as a little girl or a little boy, as you're growing before you hit puberty, you are technically growing your hips. The only way to actually naturally change your hip pelvic area bone structure is if you have a baby. If you really want to change your bone, your actual pelvic structure, you can have a baby, and usually when women have babies, their hips will naturally widen because you're preparing your birth canal to just, you know, bring in life, and you gotta have wider hips so that the baby can just shoot out of there. So in some cases, people who do get pregnant and have birth, their hips will permanently stay the wide-ish hips that they did get, but other people will actually, their hips will actually narrow and will get back to their pre-pregnancy body and hip bone structure. It just depends on you. If, you know, that's all up to Mother Nature. Another way to naturally grow your hips is just over time. There's actually research that as you get older, your hips will naturally widen, so your pelvic area will widen over time. So just wait it out if you're really that serious. Eventually, you're gonna get some wide hips. Don't you worry, it's coming. Then the other thing that you can do to widen your hips, now this isn't the natural way, but this is how some people have been able to do it, is going under the knife and getting surgery. That's not what I would recommend, but if you want to do that, whatever floats your boat, you do you, boo-boo. I'm not gonna stop you, okay? For instance, you have people like Kylie Jenner and Kim Kardashian and other people who have gone under the knife and gotten things that's called like the Brazilian butt lift, where you can actually take the fat from different parts of your body and put it in your hip area or other areas to make it look or have the illusion of a hourglass figure. And that's how people have been able to change their structure. They have the same bones in their body. They didn't change their bone structure. They just added a bunch of fat or silicone, whatever, into the areas to make it look like they have an hourglass shape. Now, you can definitely tell people who have gone through this because a lot of their thigh areas, like their thighs won't look the same as their butt. Like you can really tell they have a kind of like an ant kind of a look, and I will show you guys a picture of that. That's how you can tell when people don't exercise and try to get bigger butts, really bigger hips, is when their thighs are extremely smaller than the rest of their body. Other people also do get silicone implants, which can be a little bit dangerous. And I mean, I've heard some crazy horror stories about people injecting concrete in their thighs and all this stuff in their butt. All I will say is that if you are gonna do that, do it with caution. Proceed with caution, because you are putting things that are not natural into your body and changing your body. So just be careful, guys. I'm not knocking surgery. You do you. I could care less. Do whatever you want with your body. It's your body. But I will say, just be safe. So I hope this was informative, guys. If you guys like videos like this, don't forget to give the video a huge thumbs up. It does help me out tons. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Also, leave me a comment down below, like, what do you think about that? Would you guys be interested in me talking about my own particular body type and breaking down my body type in a different video? I thought that would have been really interesting because I have had such a hard time trying to figure out my body type, and it would be really cool to sit down with you guys and really just break down what kind of body type I am, etc., based off of science. So if you guys want to see stuff like that, let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.